The human mind, once stretched by a new idea, never goes back to its original dimensions. That's Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and it really sets the stage for what we do here. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take important sources, often complex ones, and, pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're diving into a really thought-provoking article from the print. It tackles the, let's say, complex history and identity of Indian Muslims. Specifically, it looks at this tension, this pull between loyalty to India and connections to the wider Muslim world. This is absolutely crucial stuff if you're prepping for UPSC mains current affairs, maybe even prelims, but honestly, it's vital for anyone wanting to understand India today.
Absolutely. We're going to explore how historical events, shifts in allegiance have really shaped how identity is perceived and how this has, you could argue, influenced India's foreign policy, its place within the global Muslim community. It's definitely a nuanced subject. Makes you question things, look at different angles.
Okay, sounds fascinating. But let's unpack this history and see how it echoes today. Right, so history first. Where do we begin? The source points way back, before the Mughals. During the Sultanate period, it says, Muslim rulers in India. They sort of tacitly acknowledge the Abbasid Caliphate, right? The kind of higher authority.
That's the starting point. But what's really interesting is the break that came with the Mughals from 1526. They explicitly stopped that. No more swearing allegiance to any foreign entity. And the terminology shift is key. They call themselves Padshah, not Sultan.
Padshah instead of Sultan. What's the significance there?
Well, Sultan often implied being, a governor under a caliph, even if powerful. Padshah, though, that implies full autonomous sovereignty. It was a clear statement. We rule India independently, a distinct break from what came before.
Okay, so the Mughals established this independent, India-centric identity. But then, 1857 happens. The end of Mughal power, effectively. The article suggests the Muslim ruling class, now kind of adrift ideologically, turned towards the Ottoman Caliphate in Turkey. It calls this almost a default action. Why? Because of a perceived foreign character they still held on to.
That's the argument presented, yes. It's like with the Indian anchor gone, they looked outward for a new ideological center, almost reflexively.
Were there early signs of this pro-Turkish sympathy?
The source points to a couple of things. The Russo-Turkish War in the 1870s generated a lot of sympathy here, and even the choice of dress, the Turkish fez becoming the uniform for the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College.
Which became Algar Muslim University.
Exactly. So not just politics, but cultural symbols, too, hinting at this, growing identification beyond India's borders.
Right, and this naturally leads us into pan-Islamism, late 19th, early 20th century. Today, you might say global Islam or Ummah. How did this pan-Islamism actually work? What did it mean for Indian Muslims specifically?
Well, the source defines it as more than just, religious feeling. It was a political attitude. For those who embraced it, despite living in India, their sort of existential meaning came from belonging to that global community. India was, almost incidental, born here, but belonging elsewhere, you could say, and their politics, shaped much more by events in Turkey, the Arab world, than by what was happening in India.
That is quite striking. And the article mentions that one of the biggest mobilizations against the British, it wasn't about Swaraj, self-rule for India, but about the Ottoman Caliphate's fate.
Exactly. That really underlines where the focus lay for many in that movement. Extraterritorial loyalties taking precedence.
Was everyone on board with this? What about figures like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan?
He was wary, yes, but the article suggests his opposition wasn't really about a deep commitment to Indian nationalism itself. It was more about pan-Islamism being anti-British, which he thought would harm Muslim interests under the Raj. A pragmatic concern, perhaps, rather than purely nationalistic.
Okay, so if Sir Syed was cautious, who really pushed pan-Islamism into becoming this major force?
The source gives a lot of weight to Maulana Abu Kalam Azad, his Urdu weeklies, Al-Hilal starting 1912, then Al-Bala. These were incredibly influential. They really roused Muslims against the British, framing them as, complicit in Turkey's problems during the Balkan Wars. The argument is that these journals crystallized pan-Islamism, turned it from sentiment into a coherent ideology, a political movement.
And that culminated in the Khilafat movement.
Precisely. And the author makes a very strong claim here that the Khilafat movement essentially institutionalized separatism as a kind of religious duty. And that, in turn, made partition. Well, the article says inevitable, a really significant assertion.
Inevitable, yeah. So the Khilafat movement itself, the source calls it strange, with a weird legacy. Why is strange?
Well, the core paradox is just fascinating, isn't it? You have Indian Muslims passionately trying to save the Ottoman Caliphate. Yet the Turks themselves, led by Ataturk, they weren't keen on keeping it. They abolished it in 1924.
Right. And there was another disconnect, too, about Arabia.
Yes. Indian Muslims wanted Arabia to stay under Turkish control. But the Arabs, they wanted independence, and they got it. The source says Indian Muslims seemed to be in a world of their own. They were shocked by the Turks and Arabs' actions, calling them un-Islamic, rather than perhaps reflecting on their own the article calls it quixotic pursuit, chasing an ideal that the supposed beneficiaries didn't even want.
A real disconnect from reality on the ground. And this feeds into this idea of a delusion of dual identity.
The article quotes Muhammad Ali, a key Khilafat leader from 1930. He famously said he belonged to two circles of equal size, but which are not concentric. One is India, and the other is the Muslim world. He felt part of both, couldn't leave either.
Two equal, non-concentric circles. That image raises a question, doesn't it?
It does. The source asks, why couldn't the Muslim circle be inside the Indian circle, concentric? Like other communities manage, where your religious or cultural identity is part of your broader Indian identity.
Yeah.
But the interpretation offered is that in Muhammad Ali's view, it was like the Muslim circle expanded into India, making India part of the wider Islamic sphere, suggesting Indian Muslims were primarily representatives of the global Ummah located in India.
Okay, so not seeing themselves as Indians who happen to be Muslim, but Muslims who happen to be in India. A subtle but huge difference.
That's the implication drawn by the author, yes. And this perspective, it's argued, really hindered the development of a fully shared Indian nationalism for that group.
So what does this mean for Indian nationalism overall, if pan-Islamism operates like this?
The source suggests it shifted. From potentially an idealistic link to global Muslims, it became more about dissociation from fellow Indians.
Yeah.
The author bluntly calls it just a fancy word for communal separatism, essentially anti-nationalism.
Strong words. Is there an example given for this shift?
Yes, the poet Allama Iqbal, his famous Tarana in Hindi, Sare Jahan se Acha Hindustan Hamara, our India, better than the whole world, very nationalistic. But later, his Tarane Milli has lines like, China and Arabia are ours, India is ours, we are Muslims, the whole world is our homeland.
Ah, so India becomes part of a larger Muslim domain rather than the primary focus.
Exactly. That shift in focus is presented as emblematic of the wider ideological change being discussed.
Okay, if this Ummah fixation, as the article puts it, was so powerful, how did it play out after 1947? In India's foreign policy, the source claims it set the template for 100 years. How so?
Connecting the dots, the argument is that India often adopted a pro-Ummah stance by default, especially when a Muslim country was involved in an issue. It might have been framed as solidarity with developing nations, non-alignment. But the author contends it was frequently, perhaps primarily, a nod to the sentiments of Indian Muslims, a domestic consideration driving foreign policy.
Is there a specific major example of this?
The most prominent one cited is Mahatma Gandhi's stance on Palestine, the Arab-Jewish conflict. Apparently, despite pleas from his close Jewish friend, Hermann Kallenbach, Gandhi wouldn't really engage with the Jewish perspective. He published an article in Harijan in 1938 which, according to this source, effectively cemented India's pro-Arab position.
And the reasoning behind that?
Well, Gandhi explained it in moral terms, of course, but the article interprets it as a strategic move, an attempt to, bring Indian Muslims more fully into the national movement, especially after the Khilafat experience.
Did it work? Strategically.
The author notes quite starkly that those hopes weren't fulfilled. Partitions still happened. So a major foreign policy stance, set early on, didn't achieve that intended domestic goal.
Right. So this leads to a potentially uncomfortable observation in the piece. India consistently sided with Arab or Muslim causes internationally. But what about the other way around? Reciprocity.
That's where the article points out a significant lack of it. It states that Muslim countries have rarely backed India on crucial issues, like Kashmir or conflicts with Pakistan. Often, it says, they echo Pakistan's narrative, sometimes viewing India almost like they view Israel as an adversary.
That's quite a claim.
It goes further, actually, suggesting that many Muslim countries don't even seem to show much concern for Indian Muslims themselves, sometimes confusing Hindi and Hindu, or not really regarding Indian Muslims as, quote, Muslim proper, a kind of dismissal almost.
And the OIC exclusion seems to tie into this, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Absolutely. That really drives the point home. India has, what, over 200 million Muslims, the third largest population globally, about 11% of the world's total.
Yet no seat at the OIC table, not even observer status consistently.
Exactly. Despite that huge population, India is shut out of this 57-member body, often due to politics, particularly Pakistan's influence.
So the article poses a challenging question here.
Yes. If belonging to the global Ummah is central, why doesn't this denial of representation in the OIC, this major global body, seem to rankle Indian Muslims more? Especially when, representation within the Indian political system is quite rightly a major point of discussion and concern. It highlights a potential inconsistency in those circles of belonging.
This has certainly covered a lot of ground, historically and politically. So bringing it all together, what's the takeaway for Indian Muslims' identity today, according to this analysis?
The conclusion presented in the piece is quite direct. It asserts there's really only one way for Indian Muslims to gain respect and standing within the wider Muslim world, and that is to, quote, be Indian above all, to consciously situate your Muslimness within Indianness.
One circle, not two separate ones.
Essentially, yes. The argument is that you belong to one primary circle, India. Your destiny is tied to India. It's a call to integrate identity, prioritize national belonging as the framework within which religious identity exists. It really challenges you, the listener, to think critically about identity, loyalty, and belonging.
Wow. This deep dive definitely unpacked the complex layers of identity and loyalty. Drawing on that insightful print article, it shed light on history's impact on society and foreign policy. It's clearly a crucial discussion for anyone trying to grasp modern India, global dynamics, and certainly for UPSC aspirants.
Indeed. We've seen how history, ideology like pan-Islamism, shaped this specific narrative of identity with real consequences, nationally and internationally. And the fundamental question remains, doesn't it? What does it mean to belong? How do we navigate these multiple identities we all carry in today's world?
So after hearing all this, what's the one thing that really stands out to you? Mull it over. Think about this history and what it means now. And if you found this exploration valuable, please do like this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the deep dive for more analyses like this. And definitely leave your thoughts or any further questions in the comments below. Your engagement helps us reach more people curious about these important topics. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.